The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "To you who hear I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. And from the person who takes your cloak, do not withhold even your tunic. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from the one who takes what is yours, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. For if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. If you lend money to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners and get back the same amount. But rather, love your enemies and do good to them, and lend, expecting nothing back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Stop judging, and you will not be judged. Stop condemning, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed together, shaken down, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in return be measured out to you." The Gospel of the Lord. In our first reading, we see David sparing Saul, who's begun to persecute him because he's jealous that God's favor has come to rest upon David. And then in our gospel, we hear Christ give that difficult, often puzzling command to us. To the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other as well. We see he explains more through his examples what Christian charity is to look like. And so I thought that because we have those two readings today, that this might be a good opportunity for us to reflect upon the fifth commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," and what that means for us as Christians, the demands that it makes on our life. We understand that in the beginning, God made us in his image and likeness. And though that likeness is damaged because of our sin, nevertheless, we still bear that image and likeness of God. And it's from that source, we're told, that our human dignity flows. And so, the obligation for us to treat one another with respect, the obligation to defend and preserve the lives of those around us, but also of our own. And so when it comes to the fifth commandment, we see that we're obliged not to kill. And what that means is the intentional and direct taking of the life of the innocent. Which means that there are exceptions, there are conditions under which it's legitimate to take another's life. One of those is self-defense. I'm reading here from the Catechism, paragraph 2263. The legitimate defense of persons and societies is not an exception to the prohibition against the murder of the innocent that constitutes intentional killing. The act of self-defense can have a double effect: the preservation of one's own life and the killing of the aggressor. The one is intended, the other is not. Continuing on, love toward oneself remains a fundamental principle of morality. Therefore, it is legitimate to insist on respect for one's own right to life. Someone who defends his life is not guilty of murder, even if he is forced to deal his aggressor a lethal blow. If a man in self-defense uses more than necessary violence, it will be unlawful. Whereas if he repels force with moderation, his defense will be lawful. Nor is it necessary for salvation that a man omit the act of moderate self-defense to avoid killing another man, since one is bound to take more care of one's own life than another's. And so legitimate self-defense can be not only a right, but a grave duty for one who is responsible for the lives of others. The defense of the common good requires that an unjust aggressor be rendered unable to cause harm. For this reason, those who legitimately hold authority also have the right to use arms to repel aggressors against the civil community entrusted to their responsibility. And so we see why, in that first reading, it was unlawful for David to kill the sleeping Saul. He, at that moment, presented no threat. To kill him then would not have been moderate self-defense. But we also see for us that as we seek to follow this fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, we see what it obliges us to do to preserve the life of the innocent. We see what it also enables us to do, to defend our own lives and to defend the lives of others. There's a principle in Catholic moral teaching that what one may morally do for himself, what another may morally do for himself, one may morally do for another. And so, to those who are weaker among us, we have the ability and at times the obligation to defend their lives, to defend them just as we would defend ourselves. What the Catechism pointed out is that in self-defense, there are two effects that may follow from that. One is the preservation of our own life. The other is the death of the unjust aggressor. And it says the one is intended while the other isn't. This is an old principle that was formulated in the Middle Ages called the double effect. It was formulated by St. Thomas Aquinas. That it's permissible to perform an action from which an evil effect will follow if the effect is not intended, if the good effect doesn't come from the evil, if there's a due proportion between the good and the evil effect, and if the evil effect is in no way directly sought. If those four conditions are met, for that evil effect to be allowed but not intended, to be foreseen but not desired, in that case, we can perform that action. And so the act of legitimate self-defense is one particular instance of that double effect, that principle of the double effect. Another instance on a somewhat larger scope is the taking up of arms in a just war. The Church reminds us that every just war is ultimately a defensive one, defensive of one's own nation or defensive of another nation. Just as we're allowed to defend our own lives, we're allowed to defend our society, and at times we have the obligation to do so. And oftentimes for those who fight in a just war, it's necessary for them to use force against an unjust aggressor, just as in our own self-defense. In that case, it's not the death of the enemy that they desire. Rather, it's impeding the ability of the enemy to wage war, to continue their unjust aggression. And when that ceases, at that point, so does the cause for war. Once again, that requirement that we be moderate in our use of self-defense. We be moderate in the defense of our nation. We never go to excess. Once again, we follow the example of David in that first reading. And when killing is unnecessary, we hold back. But when it is necessary to defend ourselves, to defend our nation, we have the right to do so. Hopefully, none of us will be in a position where we have to defend our lives in that way. It's more likely that some of us will be in a position where we have to defend our nation, or at least counsel those who do. And so it's important to understand what exactly our Lord teaches through this fifth commandment, what he intended to teach us in delivering that to Moses and to the Israelites, in reaffirming it when he said that till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle, not one letter or even one part of a letter of the law would pass away. We understand that the respect for life, because of the dignity imprinted on it in God's act of creation, in giving it his own image and likeness, is the source of that respect, is the source of our defense of the lives of the innocent. But we also understand that in this fallen world, there are situations where we're confronted with injustice, and in the face of that injustice, we have the right and often the duty to repel that. And it's through that that we bear witness to the gospel. That's not always the case. There are times when we must, as our Lord says in the gospel, turn the other cheek to the one who strikes us. The greatest example of that is to those happy few who are called to martyrdom, who, knowing that they cannot defend their lives against those who hate Christ and his church, and who are willing to kill those who bear the name Christian, that we submit with peaceful resignation to the will of God, that we humbly and joyfully and without resistance accept that crown of martyrdom. That's not a calling which we all will share, but it's a calling that some of us will have, some of us who are in the church. And in that case, we must try to reach those heights of Christian perfection that the Lord calls us to in the gospel. As we reflect on that fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, as we reflect on the Lord's teaching of peace, we should turn our prayers to those parts of our society, those parts of our world where peace is most threatened. Within our own borders, the crime of abortion that seeks the life of the most innocent among us, those whom we should most clearly see the image and likeness of God in. Outside of our borders, we know the threat that's faced right now in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine, due to unjust Russian aggression. And we know that our own servicemen and women have been deployed to Eastern Europe because of that threat. And so we offer together our prayers for peace. May peace reign in our homes. May peace reign in our walls. In your palaces, peace, O Jerusalem.